Morning, welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide and originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. So, what is reality anyway? This is something that's very interesting and has been coming up a lot lately. And it's funny because there are some real basic things that we look at in consciousness in quantum physics, which is all integrated. Oh my goodness. Why is this all doing this? Okay. So there are these things. So spirituality, energy work, intuitive stuff, quantum physics, all interrelated. Good morning, Kathy. And so when we start looking at those kind of things, it sort of shifts what we perceive. Okay. So I talk about things like this. And right now we're going through this morning, and especially in the United States, of all this bipolarity of who's right and who's wrong and blah, 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 right? So thing is, it's funny because I'm doing this little thing on quantum physics right now. And it's really a review of a lot of things that I know, already know intuitively and have worked with and all that kind of stuff. But there's a discussion about when we see something, right? When we, what is seeing? So what is seeing? What is hearing? So if we look at what we see and the functionality of our eyes, right, is the translation of electromagnetic waves. And so the light comes in, the pupil has to lend a certain amount of light, there's a translation that goes on, it gets sent to the brain translates it and creates it from a context of understanding that's already there in the brain. So then what we see is what we know contextually. And then the same thing also happens with hearing. So frequency, electromagnetic waves hit the ear, and it goes through, like the eardrum, and then there's so many different things that go through, but then ends up going the auditory nerve to the brain, and the brain then translates it. Again, now translating based on A, the physiology of your body, B, what you have in your brain as reference and context. And so here's the thing. You and I might have access to the exact same frequency, whatever that is. Say it's a sound, okay? And it might bother you, and I might find it a joyful thing, right? It might make you feel uncomfortable, or it might make you feel really good, and it might make me feel really uncomfortable. And that has to do with all the stuff inside my body. So you might say, this is a good sound, and I might say, this is a bad sound, right? Because of the way it makes me feel, or the context of things that I use as translation in my mind, right? Same thing with things I see. So, there's always the joke of the argument as to like what colors are, what color is what, right? Some people say, oh, well, that's, cream. And somebody else says, oh, well, no, that's ecru or eggshell or, off-white. And is somebody right and somebody wrong? That's always the question, because we in duality and separation have gotten into such a depth of judgment on what's right and wrong or good and bad based on our own perspectives, and we then believe that everybody's perspectives has to be the same as ours, because ours must be the right one, right, or the wrong one. So what I always talk about when I teach Trinity Energy Progression, when I teach my workshops and stuff like that, is to transcend our judgments, because we get lost behind our judgments, what we believe is right or wrong or good and evil. And so, oh, there's a yawn. There's a lot shifting today. That's where the yawns come from, not sleepiness. But so when we look at that, and we look at it purely from that physical, like the physiology of waves, electromagnetic waves, and all kind of stuff, and our translation. So if you think about that, and we say 5 people can be asked to describe a color, and they'll give 5 different, descriptions of it. Is it the same? Is one person right and 4 people wrong? No. It is what they see and how they experience based on their context and understanding, right? If I pick up a pen and say, what is this? Somebody who has seen and used a pen before will know what it is. It's a writing instrument. Somebody who has not ever used it before might say it's a stick of some kind. Are they right? Or who's right and who's wrong? Everybody, right? Because it's based on where their context is. So when we start talking about that, it's a very simplified way of talking about what we call reality. Because, so how real is reality? Because it's very subjective based on the seeing, the hearing, the processing, the context of what is developed in the synapses in our brains, if you want to get really physical about it, right? But also in our consciousness of separation, it's the same kind of thing. And I talk about this from a spiritual standpoint, that we are all individual facets of the divine, created to be an individual as part of the whole. And we know there are no two paths that are exactly the same. And so, and that also means that some people, like, nobody is wrong, and nobody is right and wrong. It's actually all right or whatever. Good morning, Tristan. So we get so caught up in the ego, and that's what the ego is all about. My understanding is the ego is all about the exploration of identity and separation. And in that identity and separation are the energies and emotions of separation, which is judgment and fear and anger and righteousness and blame and guilt and doubt, sorrow, pain, all that separation based, right? When we come back to wholeness, when we come back to the consciousness of being one, then it's coming from the place of, okay, where's the commonality? Where are we all together on stuff? Like, what is the whole piece, the whole symphony, right? And trusting that if I can fulfill my individual part in the whole symphony, then that is what my job was, right? Whether it was one moment, 5 moments, 5 decades, it doesn't matter. But the key is to also say that how we get to fulfilling that individual note in the symphony is based on our individual journeys. And our individual journey is perfect to who we are and what we came here to do. So my reality is much different from any others' realities. And my reality today is much different than my reality from yesterday. And it's based on different things, different, experiences, different coming together of different things. And so what I always talk about doing is removing these partitions of separation to come back to wholeness, right? And in wholeness, we come back to this unconditional love and acceptance, and committing ourselves to seeing the big picture and trusting we all got this, right? However, I'm going to get back to the reality thing, because this seems to be, I have a lot of people who've been calling me lately, and in conversation and sessions and, lunch and just passing. Oh, there's the yawn again. Wow, there's a lot of stuff flowing through this week. The conversation's been around like, I've been convinced. I somehow have been convinced that I'm in a coma somewhere and this is all a dream. That was one I had yesterday. Then there was one I had a couple weeks ago of like, I am suddenly like having these weird moments where I feel like as soon as I walk out of a room, it stops existing. And I'm like, well, maybe it does. But the key to remember is reality is fluid. It's not concrete as many think it is, right? And it's just like, I talked about a while back, is science and consciousness all that different, and which comes first, right? Where, contrary to what many believe, actually consciousness comes typically before science, because it's remembering and seeing the bigger picture. And then we then develop science. Oh, look at that. I got dinged. Obviously, I should turn off my sound. So then I just lost my train of thought because of that sound. See? Frequency. And so we spend so much time and energy trying to prove our reality. Oh, the science and consciousness, right? So the science and consciousness. Well, it's from the consciousness and understanding and remembrance of bigger picture that we create more science. So it's really interesting and backwards a little bit to sit there and say, well, if it's not proven in science, it doesn't exist. And it's like, well, Does it? Does it not exist because we don't see it? Or does it not exist because we don't remember it yet? So there's a lot of stuff around that. There's so many things that there's what I love to talk to people about is the intention experiment by Lynn McTaggart. That was like one of the original things that she did, and it's a fabulous set of experiences that show how our intentions create our realities, right? And so we can put energy to creating something. We can envision it. We can Kathy says, have you studied science of mind? I don't, because I really, like, most of what I do is through guidance. And then usually what stuff comes to me later on is stuff that reflects the stuff that I remember. And it's like, oh yeah, look, there's a science here that talks about this. And oh, look, there's a book that talks about this. And oh, look, this other person came across as this. And I love that because it shows the consistency of what we're starting to remember, right? There is also, so Kathy's talking about the science of mind, but there's also I think a church somebody told me about once that was called like the Church of Science, not Scientology, which is like the Church of Science or something, where it showed how everything's connected when you break it down to like atoms and molecules, right? That you can't tell the difference in where something starts and where something ends. So it's so interesting when we start to do all that. And it's really thinking about how we developed and evolved these physical bodies to perceive based on what we see, what we hear, what we feel. Oh, that's the other thing. When we look in quantum physics, when we look in, when we look at this, when we look in physics, period, we're not actually touching something when we touch it, because it's like actually this resistance of electrons. So what we believe is touch is just a friction, right? So like it's things that we develop based on our understanding. If we've not touched something before and not felt a certain texture, we don't know what to make of it. Sometimes we believe what somebody tells us about it, and then we make a judgment on it, and then we expect that experience every time. And that's how we start to create a reality around it. So we can always change that. So, you know, anyway, I was talking about the intention experiment, and the intention experiments were all about like creating our realities through our intentions. And, you know, I had seen that and understood that. And you know, it's really how energy work works. And actually it's how we all work, and we don't even consciously remember that until we remember it. But you know, that those things that we put the most energy to, even the things we fear, are the things we usually create. So that's where we have like this whole like generation now of affirmations and all kinds of sciences and all kinds of books, right? Manifesting, you know, we can like different kinds of courses and practices on manifestation and creation. And and that's how we start to loosen the reins on saying, okay, so instead of putting all of this energy to, well, what a shitty reality I have today, right? Because that's what a lot of people do. Oh, this is such a crappy reality, or this is such a negative thing. Instead, because here's the thing, if you look at it from that perspective, then guess what? You are reprogramming and reprogramming and reprogramming yourself to continue to have that experience. It's when we start to change that expectation and the creation and the energy, the energy we put behind the words we use, period, and what we expect to see, what we expand ourselves to allow ourselves to see and remember and hear and feel, to say, I can do this instead of I can't, or oh, how much this sucks. I mean, there's so many of us out there today, and today what's funny is that I got this topic, I didn't even connect it to what's going out there today politically with everybody. There's all kinds of debates and slamming going on out there. And it's like, wow, it's a completely broken thing that's going on. But the thing is to say, okay, well, I'm choosing differently. I'm choosing a different reality. I'm choosing, this in my personal presence right now. And I'm creating that. And if we all committed to that in a space of unconditional love and wholeness and connectedness, then all of these things that are incongruent with the good of the whole in a whole consciousness and wholeness kind of way, they would start to shift. And yes, some of us, sometimes we're guided to, get into activism, make a stand and whatever. The key is to do so from that place of self-love, from that place of wholeness, to say, I am, worthy of creating a different reality. And since you are in my reality, then I'm going to I'm going to put my energy to changing this, right? There is a reason for everything being here with us. We do create our realities. And so we have individual realities, we have collective realities, right? So consciousness is a concentric thing because, like our cells have a consciousness, our organs have consciousness, our body has a consciousness, and then we're part of even concentrically larger consciousness, and people call them collectives of different kinds, but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Until it's part of the whole. So if you look at, say, the cells in my little finger on my left hand, right? Which there are many, many, many of them. They have a certain reality and they have a certain thing that they're doing and a certain purpose of creating in terms of the consciousness that was creating, the consciousness as a whole that created to a point of, okay, this is a facet here that is this body of me and this experience, right? And these cells have a consciousness in their reality, right? And so they have all they know about is what's functioning right there in their little reality of creating that finger and keeping that finger running, right? And when they become broken, or when it becomes separated, or something happens in blockage, guess what happens? You lose the finger. You can have a whole bunch of different things. You can have problems. You can have pain. So if you look at it such a very microscopic view, it's very easy then to open up to larger levels of consciousness and realize, okay, so instead of losing myself in the energy of judging and like getting righteous and like pushing my opinion onto others, I have to look at what it is that's important for me. That's important for me to look at, that's brought this up, this trigger, right? This trigger of need to prove myself right, that's a big thing, a big step back for us to take. There's a lot of change to go with that. And it sounds really simple, but we have this so embedded because we're so used to, and I talked last week about sending out arrows, emotional arrows, and turning that around and looking in the mirror as to what those triggers are, that's coming from me, that's making me annoyed about somebody else or whatever. It's the same kind of thing. And it doesn't matter if it's your neighbor, your friend, your coworker, or, the president, or those in office, or whoever, right? If it's there in our reality, it's a message or a reminder from our higher consciousness of what to look at and how it fits together with the bigger picture. And why am I getting so righteous about this? Why am I so, judgmental or opinionated? Why do I feel the need to make somebody feel bad about their own reality or their own subjective opinion and make me feel better about my own? Because somewhere deep down, I feel like I need to prove myself, and I don't feel like I'm already innately worthy, as divine as I am. And that's really the core of mostly anything. I always say it's like, there's that game, was it 4 Steps to Kevin Bacon or whatever? And I'm like, there's only 2 steps. Sometimes one, just to unworthiness, to worthiness, right? To the need to believing that we're unworthy and having to prove ourselves. So I prove myself a better person by being right? That's how we sort of feel in the ego. I prove myself to do this and I prove myself to do that. And if I'm right and you're wrong in this situation. But then the thing is, if we are completely perceiving based on, like, say, electromagnetic waves, particles, physicality, and physiological interactions, right, in our consciousness here, in the piece of our consciousness that's embodied here, then how can I say you're wrong and I'm right? Because we're just different. We just are having individual experiences. And so when we talk about facts, it's really funny. I always joke about this. Like, we talk about facts. Somebody goes out there, and today it's become so funny to watch how, like, somebody will come out and be like, oh, well, this is a fact. And then if they say it, with enough authority, people just believe them. And then they just take that as truth. And then they accept that as their truth. And then they start using that as their, basis for comparison. And then whatever. And you see all these, like, layers of stuff that we don't listen to our inner voice and instead are listening to everything outside of me, because again, worthiness, we don't believe we have all the answers. We don't believe we have all the knowledge and remembrance, and we do. It's just remembering how to access it. So Kathy asked, how do you tune into your higher consciousness? Well, that takes more than, 10 minutes, which is what I have left. But it's a constant commitment to taking some time to quiet the chatter from outside and quiet the chatter in your mind. So, you don't talk about, like, it's so funny. We always come back to meditation. We always come back to having that quietude and that presence, right? And everybody's like, oh yeah, okay, I did that Sunday. But consistent practice of this quietude, right? And no matter how that works for you, it doesn't have to be sitting on a mountain in lotus position, for hours at a time, although that would be lovely for me. But it's just the practice, finding a way to quiet the chatter in your mind, because it's when you quiet the chatter, because it's the chatter that's the ego. The chatter is, oh, I'm afraid of this. Oh, I'm angry about this. Oh, I have to prove this, or I have to defend myself, or blah, blah. That's all ego, right? So all of that stuff is going in our minds, right? If we never, ever take the time to quiet all that chatter, to become present in our whole self, right? We are then only ever listening to that chatter, which is actually a pretty low level of our consciousness. Our higher consciousness is the clearer presence of who we are. And the more we can quiet the chatter, the more we can start to hear the higher consciousness. And people say, how do you do that? How do you know? I'm like, well, because typically the ego is like, oh, don't do that. Or, oh, you got to do that. Oh my God, we have to be afraid of that, because that's all those separation-based energies and emotions, right? So when we hear the higher voice, which we do often, it's just very simple. It's very calm. And it comes from here versus here. It comes from a place of peace and wholeness, right? So like a difference is this, because from our higher consciousness, we see the whole picture. And I always used to use the example of like players at a game board, right? So players, like, you have the pawns on the board, and the pawns are basically directed by the players, right? But then they can only see really what's around them on the board. And then the players can see the whole board, right? But then you got the maker of the game who sees the whole game to begin with, right? And that's all different levels of our consciousness. So if like, say you're doing, like, so I've had situations like this, and this is how the difference, like, when the ego goes, oh my God, we can't do this, we're going to get killed, or we're going to get hurt, right? That's fear. That's fear triggered, right? When the voice comes to you that says, do this, or do this instead, that is much, much more commonly the higher self. Now, the funny part is, we override that voice so much because of all that fear and separation-based chatter and all that kind of stuff that's based in our minds. So it's that simple. Like, everybody puts so much credence and weight in, those professing to be, gurus and everything else. We're all gurus. Because I love when people say, oh, well, I'm not a guru. I'm like, yes, you are. I am. Absolutely. I'm God. And so are you. And so, but the thing is, it's the matter of just hearing that voice, because that voice, that higher consciousness, has the bigger picture. Like, we know it. We created it. We continue to create it. And it's a practice, and it's a commitment. So many balk at that. I have so many people that I know that fight it. And I'm just like, wow, there was somebody I worked with for a while, and I finally would just be like, okay, well, don't come back until you start, meditating, because you know how to do it and you know what to do. And then I come back for another session, and I could tell this one particular person, was so funny. Like, after this period of time, and she came back after this period of time, and her energy was completely different. She was calm. She was relaxed. She was very clear. And when we spoke, she said, yep. And she didn't even have to tell me, but she said, yeah, I've been doing it. I've been meditating every day. She goes, I do, simple stuff, but it helps me to clear out the chatter. And she goes, and ever since I've been doing that, she's like, everything seems to flow so much more easily. She goes, I'm getting more done than I ever thought I could. She goes, like, so all the excuses that I gave you for all that time of, oh, I don't have time to do it, they sort of fell by the wayside, because the more I do it, the more I get done. The more I take the time out for myself to listen to that voice, to get to that presence and centeredness. She's like, the easier everything just flows, because I don't waste that much energy listening to the chatter anymore. Like, and I observe it and I see it and I'm like, what's that about? And she goes, and then I shift it to quietude, to presence. So that was one of many people I've spoken to. So it's funny, because I see all this resistance, and then I know people who say, oh, well, I can just be connected all the time and never quiet down. I'm like, except you still haven't mastered the quieting of the ego, right? So yeah, we are connected all the time, because this is all spiritual, right? We always talk about like, oh, there's the spiritual stuff, blah, blah. It's like, no, this is all the spiritual creation of our reality. I've sort of gone off on a tangent, but this is all important, because the clearer we are in consciousness, the clearer we are in that presence and centeredness, the easier it is for us to create and manifest the reality that we choose from a higher perspective. Now, the funny thing is, people say, well, how come I don't get what I want? Da, da, and I keep on saying I want a Mercedes SUV, and it just isn't happening. I'm just like, but does that really, serve the bigger symphony? Well, if it does, then you can create it. And sometimes we do just for fun, But the key then is the non-attachment, because we know that our reality can change. And what serves me in creating reality right now can be different 5 minutes from now, or 2 hours from now, or next week. And so when we aren't connected to, when we don't stay attached to this moment, and I'm just sort of present and flowing through it, knowing in full consciousness that I create my reality, when I'm not attached to it, then I allow it to evolve and expand as my remembrance expands. And so we have all of these options and variabilities, right? And, I've seen things where we choose in timelines. It's Tristan saying here, whatever, we create so many timelines because we pretty much carry out anything we desire to. It's a matter of which timeline that we create in it. And so in this period of evolutionary consciousness where we are shifting to another set of experiences, we're doing the combination and assimilation of timelines. And that's where the consciousness goes of, well, everything I've done has been everything, and it's been complete and whole, and not all separated off anymore, right? So and as we get into higher consciousness and then that constant practice of it, then we see facets of things that are not quite here. So then you start questioning what reality is, right? This sort of come back around full circle, because I see things I'm doing in other timelines. I see things I'm doing in other parts of the multiverse, and what's real? Is that unreal? And is this real? Or is that all real and this is unreal? I myself have had a lot of experiences lately where in my sleep state, I keep on going to I do all this stuff that I can remember, stuff that I can't too. But then it's funny coming back here, because it's almost like this is starting to really feel like the dream state. And that's happening for a lot of people. And it's being a challenge to many, the mind of many, like I said, that I spoke to, because then they start questioning everything, right? Like, well, what is this reality? Am I in a coma someplace? Am I dreaming this whole thing? I'm like, why do you have to be in a coma? Well, maybe you're in a different, what if, here's a mind-blowing thought. This came to me in meditation this morning, and I thought it was great. Yeah, Tristan says, peeking behind the curtain. Here was a great thing. So we talk about seeing beyond the matrix. And I've been talking about the matrix a lot lately, especially this week. It's been a huge topic. But it was like this. I was out in the meditation and I was like, okay, so what can I see through the matrix, right? Exactly those terms. I even wrote that in my journal. And so, I was like, there are all these possibilities and all these actualities of the different things that we're doing, right? So I was like, well, what if, here's a story. I was like, oh, maybe I should write this down and make a fiction book out of it. Like, what if we all are living on some other planet? What if we are the Arcturians and the Pleiadians and the Andromedans and Syrians and whatever, and we're doing this movie that we put ourselves to sleep like in the Matrix, and we create this world together collectively to have this experience. what if we did that? Don't be driving, Kathy says, lol. Yeah, that's the truth. There are some times I get someplace and I go, oh my God, how did I get here? I'm so glad to have that higher consciousness guiding the way. But anyway, like when we start having these like perceptions across the lines, right? And we allow reality to be blurred and expansive, right? It becomes, to me, it becomes much more fun. And yes, the mind might start freaking out a little bit. That's why it's important to have that centeredness, to have that clarity, and to be able to get the chatter out, to be like, okay, what if we just considered this possibility? And so that's what I want you to do. I want you to look this week at everything in your reality and ask yourself, so how real is this? Like how can I change this? Or what if I did change this? Or what if this did change? Or what is the craziest, most out there thing I could like imagine to create? And see, like, okay, so, you know, like just expand your mind a little bit. What could this be that I'm looking at that I think like, okay, here's this glass of water. Like I was talking about the whole like in meditation and seeing like being on another planet and creating this consciousness. It's like a virtual reality thing. Well, what if this cup right here that has water in it, what if that water is an entire planet of its own? Makes you think of like Men in Black, right? You have the locker, right? Where the little beings had their whole world in the little locker. It's all of that. That's what this whole multiverse is about. And the more we open ourselves up to it, the more we actually start to see all these dots connect that we never understood before. And then the less we get attached to what is right here in front of our face and saying, okay, whatever, easy come, easy go. Yes, co-creation, oneness, unity, consciousness. It's like this is how it becomes fun, right? And we play in it. And every once in a while we get a little tripped up. And I had a little bit of a time yesterday myself. I was in a little bit of a strange place because of a conversation I had. And then I was like, okay, yep, nope, that's true. And it's good. And now I can move on because I'm like, okay, now I can look at it in different ways. But that's what we're retraining ourselves to do, is that acceptance. And the more we do that, by the way, in our physiology of our bodies, in our brains, we change our synapses to be able to see and hear and feel things very differently. So the more, and that's again what meditation helps us with too, as we retrain, because all the synapses make these, we've created our bodies to create pathways based on habits. And when we change our habits, we can change the pathways by changing the habits. And so as we do that, we can allow our consciousness and our remembered consciousness in the physical body to expand continuously. And then to just be a flowing consciousness in and out of the body is optimal in terms of creation and where we are in our existence and evolution and how quickly we do it. So have some fun this week. Look at that. Look at all the pieces in your reality and say, well, what could this really be? You know, what are the possibilities? Because when we start to expand the possibilities of acceptance in our minds, and we can start to see different things in our reality and create them and know to create them, remember to create them. So so Kathy asked, how often and how long do you meditate? I make the effort to meditate every day. Now, I don't always meditate every day. I meditate at least 5 times a week. And I prefer to meditate at least for a half hour, because that's where I like, it's like about, I like hit a sweet spot in there. I love to do at least a half hour. And if I can do an hour, that's great. And there are some times where I'm guided to go longer if I have the time. It's not always that I have the time. So what I'll just always set up there is, okay, in this time that I have, that I put aside for me to do my meditation, let me get all the insights and the presence and the expansion to help me move forward in this consciousness for my day. So whether it's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, doesn't even matter. I tell people you can do it in 10 minutes, as long as you start to make that regular practice, you know, in your reality. So yeah, and I can post here afterward. I've done this before. I have a recorded guided meditation that's like a 10-minute meditation. That's really just a heart expansion and a real presence meditation. It's literally 10 minutes, and it's helped a lot of people to even just start getting into that habit, because it feels really good. So thank you I'll post that here when we get off. Thank you for joining me. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing off with this week's Living the Shift.